In it here now, I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is your host, Chris Bair of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful 2024 spring morning. We're in the upper Midwest. We are right in the heart of spring planting. Our planting season is going very, very well. Over the last couple of weeks, we've had very, very timely rains after an open, dry, kind of a harsh winter in a way, but very, very dry. We've gotten a fair amount of rain over the last 3 weeks. I think we got well over 5 inches of rain, which has set the table for ideal planting. And for us in the upper Midwest, there's two things that helps a crop get started really fast. One is moisture and the other one is ground temperature. And right now, both of those are ideal for our spring planting. And so we're looking forward to a good crop start. Today on the show, we're trying something new. We're going to do a roundtable with several of the Sioux Falls team members. I've got Kyle Waller with us, who is our equipment representative, and Josh Erickson, who is going to be talking a lot about supply and demand and defining supply and demand. And what we're going to talk about today is just what's going on in the machinery market. There's lots of coffee shop chatter. There's a lot of people talking about machinery values and what's strong and what's not strong and where's the market going and why is it going in the direction it's going. So we're gonna talk about that in detail in today's Legacy of Agriculture show. I want to give a shout out to Pifer Auction Realty and Land Management. They're a sponsor of our show. We hear a lot of commercials from the good folks at Pifer's and they've just been a huge supporter of this show, and we appreciate the good people at Pifer's. Before we get too far into our show, I want to talk about some very interesting statistics that are coming from the American Farm Bureau Federation that, to me, is actually very encouraging. The American Farm Bureau Federation is telling us that family farms and ranches account for 90% of the total agricultural production value here in the United States. That's a good number. That's a huge number for family farms here in the United States. And another encouraging statistic that I really liked is that the statistics are telling us that the average age of the farmer is 65 years old. However, they're also saying and telling us that 30% of all farmers are beginning farmers in business less than 10 years. Their average age is 47. That means we've got a good core group of young farmers that are coming up through the ranks that is going to take over agriculture eventually. One thing that's a little off subject is that almost 10% of the U.S. farmers are serving or have served in the military. That's a great number. So almost 10% of our farmers not only have protected us and kept our family and our countries free, but they're now producing something that we use on an everyday basis, which is food. So farming accounts for 1% of the U.S. domestic product. So there's lots of interesting fast facts and fun facts about agriculture that are sitting out there. So anyway, just something to chew on as you're in spring planting or as you're driving down the road listening to the podcast. Lots of good things that are happening in agriculture. And before we get into some of the trends that we're seeing in the agricultural machinery markets, I want to have Josh talk just a little bit about supply and demand and why supply and demand is so vitally important to agriculture. Josh?
Well, supply and demand is actually, I think it's something that a lot of people understand, even if they can't put into words, right? Supply is simply how much of something there is, how much of something is available to be used. And this could be anything from machinery to commodities, even to labor. And we saw labor as a big part of a shortage of labor during COVID. Demand is how much of a desire there is for that thing being used, right? So if you have too much supply, then your demand can't meet that. You have corn that's sitting in the bins that isn't being used. If you have too much demand but not enough supply, if you can't get enough corn to fill that demand, you see a rise in price. So how much of something there is versus how much of something or how much of that thing that people want, it's what defines value, right? So if more people want it and there's not enough, your value is going to be high. If there's a ton of it and not a lot of people want it, then your value is going to be low. And money ultimately is an exchange of value. It is just this thing is worth what this is worth. So when we look at stuff like the machinery markets and how we've been participating in it the past several years, we've had a very, very low supply compared to the demand. As our manufacturing took a hit with the virus that was going around the world, as people were struggling to get parts in, there's not a shortage of people wanting things. People still want their tractor parts, their brand new tractors, their brand new skid steers, their skid steer buckets. But we don't have enough of those to fill that need. So you see these record high prices the past several years.
So in simple terms, if I'm manufacturing tractors, for example, I'm a tractor manufacturer, and I know that there's 100 people out there to buy tractors. I want to produce 99 of them.
Exactly.
I only want to produce 99. That way, the demand stays high, the supply stays moderate, and I'm probably, because I'm one tractor short, I'm probably going to be able to sell them for a great price. However, if I have 100 tractor buyers and I produce 110 of them, more than likely the demand is going to shrink substantially, and the supply is going to be too high, and there's not going to be a balance in the marketplace.
And that is something that given time will self-correct, right? If you have 10 tractors sitting on the lot that were manufactured this past year, you're going to manufacture 10 less tractors next year because you've still got 10 brand new tractors, right? Same kind of thing with commodity prices. If corn is going lower, you will have some farmers who decide that they want to plant soybeans next year because they know corn's low. And so there will be less corn, and then corn prices will rise. So it's kind of a delicate balancing act, but it does self-balance. It tends to anyway.
Well, the nice thing about agriculture that every other industry doesn't have is that whether you're an attorney or an accountant or somebody downtown, or whether you're living in rural in the rural Midwest, is that everybody eats. Everybody is touched every day by agriculture in one way or another. Period. No question about it. And so agriculture plays a vital, important role in our culture and in what we do and how we do it, and it's a great occupation to be in, whether you're an auctioneer, whether you're a farmer, or whether you're a dealer, or whether you're a commodity broker.
And yeah, the supply of agriculture, or the demand of agriculture will never reach zero because there's always somebody who needs to eat. That's how it works. There's other industries like that where all of a sudden your demand just drops because it's obsolete. Food isn't.
Yep, that's exactly right. And talking about supply, we're coming down to the end of our first segment. Pfeiffer Auction Realty has a great line of machinery that they're going to be selling throughout the spring of 2024 into the summer of 2024. For more information, go to the Pfeiffer's website at pfeifers.com. Nobody, absolutely nobody, does it better.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeifers. Nobody does it better.
Hey everybody, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're back in our second segment. My guests today are Josh Erickson and Kyle Waller, and we appreciate them for taking time out of their busy day to be with us and to help us out at the Legacy of Agriculture. They're both very instrumental in the success of the good people at Pfeiffer's and have carved time out of their busy schedule to be with us. Today we're talking about supply and demand and what's going on in the machinery market. We'll talk a little bit later on a little bit about what's going on in the land world, but the chatter and the coffee shop talk seem to be about the machinery markets and what's going on in the machinery markets. And is the machinery market free falling? Is it normalizing? What is the machinery market doing? And Josh did a great job explaining in the first segment about supply and demand and defining what supply and demand is. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper as to what's actually going on in the machinery market. According to some of the sources that we use on a regular basis, and we follow very closely machinery values, what is the machinery market going to be in 30 days from now or for 60 days from now? Because in the auction world, we live in pretty much a 60-day cycle. We're trying to guesstimate what a tractor is worth today and what that tractor is going to be worth, or that combine or that planter is going to be in 60 days from now. Now, so part of the machinery that sits on a dealer's lot or is being traded for or sitting in a machinery shed is seasonal, and it will vary greatly by the time of the year that that piece of equipment is sold. And so we have to be a little bit conscious of the timing, but we need to be more conscious of what the market is doing as a whole, because oftentimes when you do a farm sale, for example, and you do it in the early part of September, of course, selling a planter that's not an ideal time. That planter might be worth substantially less in September than obviously what it's worth in February or March. So we're always trying to give good advice to our clientele and to the people that we're working for. But in the same token, you have to look at the bottom line. Obviously, you're not going to have 4 farm sales. You're going to have one farm sale, and you pick the best time of the year to have that farm sale where you can yield the best values. But in today's conversation on the legacy of agriculture, I want to dive deeper into what the market is doing in 2024 as a whole, not what it's doing seasonally. So as we're watching a lot of the reports, we hear a lot of chatter out there that the machinery market is free falling, but is the marketplace really free falling, Kyle, or are we starting to see more of a normalization from what's happened over the last 10 years?
You know, Chris, that's a good question, and everybody always asks that question when they talk to us. What is going on? Is it free falling? Is it crashing? Are we starting to see normal prices we were 5 to 10 years ago? Historically, looking at what's going on and the numbers that are out there and the data being provided to us, it's normalizing. We're going back to numbers that were, pre-COVID pandemic, what was going on, in the last 5 years. We're seeing more of a normalization of the markets. And the values out there, we've seen, as Josh explained a little bit in segment 1, the supply was a huge concern through COVID. The new product being produced out there wasn't there for guys to purchase. So we've seen a rise in equipment values on used too. Your late model implements and all that stuff, there was a rise in values because there wasn't enough being produced and guys needed to update equipment. And the only way to do that is to buy, what was out there,
Yes, that's
and
right.
So supply was a huge factor through the last 3, 4, 5 years on what guys could purchase.
Right.
So with that, it increases your values. Now that we're seeing manufacturing of equipment getting caught up in the markets, we're seeing, more lines of machinery around at dealers and sitting in yards and everything starting to catch back up. We're starting to see a normalization again. the values are starting to normalize a little bit because guys have more there they can purchase. There's starting to be more equipment. It's easier to get equipment now than it was, 2, 3 years ago. And so we're seeing a little bit more of a normalization when we're looking at values.
That's exactly right. Sandhills Publishing puts out some interesting statistics that's available to the public. And one of those statistics that they put out is what they call the Equipment Value Index. And I want to use the U.S. tractor market index of tractors that are over 100 horsepower. Back in this index, the graph actually shows auction values versus asking values. In other words, if you have a dealer that is asking $250,000 for a tractor, and there is a comparable tractor that is going to be on an auction, from about mid 2019 to about mid 2022, the auction values were outpacing the asking values at a dealership. And that's a very interesting statistic because historically that is not the case. There's a lot of factors that drive that, but really if you want to talk about why it is, it basically comes back down to supply and demand. So that $250,000 combine oftentimes was not available at that dealership because of supply chain issues. And so producers were required to go out into the used marketplace and to find that piece of equipment in the marketplace, whether that combine was in Illinois, whether it was in New Mexico, or wherever that was. They were driving further and further out to find that piece of equipment. However, in about mid-2022, when manufacturers were catching up with the marketplace, that auction value has dropped substantially. And over the last 18 months, it almost appears that it's in a free fall. But when you really look at the statistics are showing that it's falling back to the levels that we had back in 2016 and 2017. And right next to that equipment value index that they have put out, there's an inventory variance from 2017 to through 2019 that held really quite strong. But in the early part of 2021, when it was so hard to get components to build this equipment, you'd build a combine, and you had a Case IH combine that was sitting in Grand Island, Nebraska, and you couldn't get a computer board for it. There it sat outside.
Yeah, there was, I remember we were down that way traveling, and I drove by the Grand Island plant down there, and there was a lot of combines sitting there, and a lot of it was, little chips and little components that they couldn't get just because.
Or a gearbox.
That, everybody was in a hold on because of the pandemic.
Yeah,
that's manufacturing going on right there.
And it's kind of system wide, which is what's a little bit odd about that moment is that if you throw a rock anywhere in the country, you'll hit someone with an anecdote like that. If you were down in Texas, they've got combines sitting on the lot. If you're up in North Dakota, they've got combines sitting on the lot. It's not like this is only the Midwest or only, the Northeast is dealing with this. It's everywhere. And so those crazy values, it's not surprising. Like that's what should and what does happen when something that big affects the marketplace,
Yeah, and if you can't, and the other thing was on some things, if you couldn't get parts for it, what are you going to do? You have to harvest your crop. So it made guys look at other options of, do I go purchase another combine?
Do I have a second combine?
Do I have to have a backup? Do I have to, what do I need to do to make sure that I can fulfill my needs for harvest?
You're exactly right. Hey, folks, we're coming down to the end of our second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. I've been joined here with Kyle Waller and Josh Erickson. They're professionals in the business and know a lot about supply and demand and what's going on in the used machinery market and also in the real estate markets. I'll give a huge shout out to Pfeiffer Auction Realty for a complete listing of all of their equipment and land auctions. Go to Pfeiffers.com or give us a call at 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better. Good morning, everybody. This is your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm Chris Bair. We appreciate you joining us. We're having a great conversation today about machinery values in the spring of 2024 and what we're seeing out there in the marketplace. In segment one, Josh talked about the definition of supply and demand and how supply and demand works really in all markets. In segment number two, we talked about what's going on in the marketplace, and I want to take just a little bit deeper dive into what's going on in the machinery markets as a whole and what the supply side is doing. Back in 2019 and 2020, and into the early parts of 2021, we were still seeing a major shortage of equipment, which was driving auction values. We were seeing extremely high auction values. Lots of records were broken at auctions as people out there are gathering information about what auction values are. We saw lots of record-breaking prices. Now, as the supply chain has filled and the pipeline, as sometimes we refer to it as, has filled back up with machinery, we're seeing that is driving the demand down because there's getting to be more and more supply out there. For example, however, there's some really positive spots in the machinery market right now. Four-wheel drive tractors, for example, the research that we're seeing on four-wheel drive tractors is that they're remaining fairly steady. Now, the supply hasn't seemed to really change a whole lot. We have to take into consideration the compensation for inflation, but the used four-wheel drive, the tractor market has remained fairly strong to date. We've seen some change in the 100 horsepower and more, but I would never say that we're in free falling. We're just seeing a normalization in the marketplace. The smaller tractors, 100 horsepower and under tractors, we're seeing some changes in that marketplace, and it's probably dropping faster in the 100 horsepower and under than it is 100 horsepower and over. And that's simply because supply is caught up. And so Kyle, let's take a deep dive into what's going on in the marketplace. We see there's different types of auctions. There's the online auctions, we've got live auctions, we've got all kinds of different auctions. But let's take a little bit deeper dive into retirement auctions versus, say, consignment auctions, or the one-up item that is getting sold as maybe a producer is realigning his line of machinery. What is the difference between a bona fide retirement auction and its values versus a machine's value in a consignment setting?
A lot of it has to do with the seller too in a lot of those cases. When you look at a farm retirement sale, as I's always looked at it, and as Pfeiffer's looks at it, there's three components that go with that all the time. Is the quality of the seller, how is the seller taking care of his equipment in a retirement,
his reputation.
His reputation's the biggest thing in that too. Is he taking care of the machinery? And when you're selling a whole line of equipment that's all one seller, you can see the value there. And guys are willing to pay more money when they can see that the equipment's been well taken care of. The guy's got a good reputation. There's going to be a good, reputable piece of machinery in that line. Some of the things we're seeing right now with online consignments and consignment sales is there's not a whole lot of facts. They can't see everything that goes along with that. They can't see the whole line of machinery that person used as you would with a retirement sale, just a standalone retirement sale. And so there's a little bit of concerns out there with some of these online auctions out there going on right now too, is you got one piece here, you got another piece way over in another location. What's the difference on the two? They might be close in hours, they might be the same year, they might be the same thing, but how is each piece used? And what we're seeing is a lot of people are wanting to go back to live auctions where they can come kick the tires easier. They can come in, they can see all the machinery where it's at one location, for a consignment sale. We're seeing a lot of value in that with people as we're hosting our live consignment sales there at our facility in Worthing is people can come kick the tires. They want to go back to live auctions. They want to be able to come in, look at it, see it, start it, kick the tires, check the fluids in it as it sits there, where some of that you haven't been able to do. Through the pandemic, there was a lot of people that were a little iffy about going and looking at machinery. The online auctions, worked very well for some of that to be able to move machinery, but now people are changing. They're going back to, previous times of, we want to go back to a live auction. And there's a lot more value right now we're seeing in numbers on guys being able to do that. The machinery values are up a little bit more than they are if they can't go look at it specifically.
And there's more transparency.
More transparency on all the equipment. So,
well, with that transparency, a little bit of that is the reputation of the company that's selling. One thing that I've noticed with your online only auctions, especially ones that have folks take their own pictures, that kind of thing. Some folks do a phenomenal job with pictures. Some folks aren't in the business of selling machinery, they're in the business of using machinery. So when they take their photos, it's a little harder to see things like quirks in that machine. Using a company that knows what they're doing, that knows which pictures to take, and that most importantly is going to be honest when taking those photos. If you have a damaged hydraulic hose, or you have a piece of the glass that's broken, having a company that you trust that's going to picture that and post that online, rather than someone who you frankly don't know, it can make a world of difference in the value of that machine. It really can.
Yes, and it can change the demand for that piece of equipment. Absolutely, 100% for sure. So what you're saying, Kyle, is that in a farm retirement type situation, the demand for that equipment is always going to be higher because he's got, say, 100 pieces of equipment or 50 pieces of equipment he's selling. More than likely, he's probably bought all of that stuff new. More than likely, he's the one that's maintained it, versus a consignment sale type situation or an online sale where you're selling for 50 or 100 or 150 different sellers. The buyer can become a little bit disoriented as to what's a good piece and what's a bad piece. Hey, folks, we're coming down to the end of our third segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. Kyle Waller and Josh Erickson are here with us. We're right in the middle of our 2024 spring auction run. For a complete listing of all of the auctions that we've got in 2024, both on the land and the equipment side, you'll want to go to pifers.com or give us a call at our Sioux Falls, South Dakota office at 605-836-2277. Nobody does it better.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Pifers Auction Realty and Land Management. Pifers offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit pifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pifers. Nobody does it better.
Hey, we're back in our fourth segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair, Josh Erickson, and Kyle Waller. We're actually not in the WNAX Pifer studio today. We're actually recording on site in our first ever Legacy of Agriculture Roundtable discussion. So we're trying something new today. So those of you that get to watch us on YouTube, it's a little bit of a different experience. We're sitting at our conference table out just right off from our main theater here at the Pifers Sioux Falls facility just south of Sioux Falls. Appreciate you guys coming in. This has been a great conversation about what is the market doing concerning agricultural machinery. And I want to reiterate, and Kyle's going to go into it just a little bit more, that we're not in a free-falling market. There's no need to panic about if I paid $300,000 for a tractor 2 years ago, is that tractor going to be worth only $25,000 in 6 months from now? That's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about markets that are normalizing, coming back down to reasonable, equitable, calculated values versus inflated values where everybody, except for the buyer, was enjoying a great market. And now it's coming back more into a buyer's market rather than a seller's market. And that's not a bad place to be when the marketplace is normalizing. Don't tell any of my dealers I said that. But that's just the way the markets are in the machinery, and we're seeing that in the cattle side too, right, Kyle?
Yeah, livestock. I mean, when you're looking at livestock in whole, you take the cattle markets, there's been a shortage of cattle throughout the whole world. There's not as many cattle as there was 10, 15, 20 years ago right now.
Well, the cattle markets, the inventory numbers are as short as they've ever been.
Yep. And so when you go to the grocery store and you look at the price of a steak, it's pretty high right now. And so, you have inflation with supply and demand. The supply of livestock out there is lower than it has been in the past. And you're going to see the demand still stay there. People still want to eat, and you're going to see values increase. You're going to see that inflation cost. We've seen that through COVID and all that stuff too with the equipment side, where now with the equipment, as the supply is catching up, we're seeing numbers come back to where it's a fair market value. We're seeing fair markets out there again to where we were pre-pandemic, and now we're seeing machinery starting to level out a little bit too. The numbers are starting to kind of get a little closer and tighter now to where, you're looking at doing appraisals and that it's a little bit easier to go around and look at machinery because it's starting to steady itself back out.
And what we're talking about is fair market value.
Yep.
What is fair market value? What is fair to the seller? What's fair to the buyer? When a transaction transacts in a certain way,
Yep.
That is what establishes fair market value. That's what establishes the market. Josh?
Well, human nature also is that whatever's going on at any given time, we like to think that that's what's always gone on and what always will go on. So for the past 3-4 years, prices have been great if you're looking to sell equipment. So we get used to that. We think that prices have always been great and always will be great. Prices are still good. For equipment values, they're going back to what they should be. They're just not way up high in the sky anymore. And people haven't quite readjusted their expectations to that, but that does not mean that the market is just completely gone. The market's still there. People still need equipment to farm. You can't just farm without a tractor. That's not going to happen. So,
well, and I agree with that. And if you sit with anybody who's a good financial advisor, whether you sitting with a good attorney or a good accountant, and you're trying to figure out what your forward-moving plan is that, as always, you don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to whatever the market's doing today. If you're looking at selling equipment, or you're looking at having a farm retirement auction, or if you're a dealer, choose an auction company, choose an auctioneer that is willing to sit down with your inventory list and take a look at that machinery and give you good information before you sell it. We see so many times that a seller will go in and pick the first auctioneer that comes in that's the easiest and the most convenient, rather than really sitting down and saying, what do they know about the marketplace? What does the auctioneer know about the marketplace? What does the salesman know about the marketplace? Is he just giving information on retail values, or is he really willing to sit down and roll up your sleeves and say, hey, you've got an MX 280 tractor here that might have more hours, or maybe it was on a feed wagon rather than a planting tractor, and give good information about that piece of equipment that you're considering selling, or on that piece of equipment that will give you the best information that's out there, so that the seller can make the decision as to what's best for him, and not maybe having the dealer tell him or an auctioneer tell him what the best decision to make. Would you agree with that, Kyle?
Yeah, I'd agree with that a lot. It really is true that right now we are starting to see the normalization of what we consider in the auction business fair market value. And it's got to be fair for everybody. What we've seen here over the last couple of years with COVID, and that it's really inflated itself a lot, and now we're starting to see these markets change, become more normalized to what they were. It's very important to understand and know what machinery values are doing and what's going on with them, and setting the expectations there for the sellers, and giving good information out to the buyers too on what's happening.
Yep.
Because if you don't, you're gonna you're gonna have some upset people at some point in time too, and to be able to understand that and give good information is very, very important right now.
Well, and not only that, but having an auctioneer that can communicate properly with the buyers and give the buyers good information as well. That's just as important as giving good information to the sellers, because that buyer might be 300 miles away. And if you as an auctioneer are not giving good information, you're not doing your job. You're not doing what you're paid for. Or if you can't get a hold of them.
That is true.
If you're looking at selling a $300,000 piece of equipment, do your homework. Go out to different auctions. Come see us down at Pfeiffer's. Come see how a sale is done here. We've got one coming up on May 29th that's selling some nice equipment, and come see how the sale actually functions. Come see what equipment values are doing for yourself. I agree with the lack of knee-jerk reaction. I tend to be a more cautious person. See what equipment values are doing. Come see how equipment is sold, and then make a decision on if selling right now is right for you. But don't panic because of what someone tells you over the table is happening.
Or
it's never a good way to be.
Major drop. Don't just go right out and
don't decide to sell the farm tomorrow. That would not be my recommendation.
Don't start your balance sheet on fire yet.
Exactly.
Quite yet. Wait for one more week, right?
Yeah, at least.
But no, I think going back to some of the things Chris was talking about, with having good accountants, financial advisors, attorneys, one of the biggest things I see too is making sure if you are thinking about retiring out there in any transportation, construction, or ag, make sure that you get a roadmap put together, and get good information put together to help make your decisions as you go down the road.
That is the best advice that we could give our listeners, whether you're buying or whether you're selling, is creating a good roadmap with good information, with people that know what's going on in the marketplace. Unfortunately, folks, we're at the end of our fourth segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate you joining us. We're also on Apple, Spotify, and most recently on YouTube. And so you can join and listen to this show at any time through those media sources. We appreciate you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. This is your host, Chris Bair of the Legacy of Agriculture.
$500,000 bid.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pfeiffer's at 605-836-2277.